The Dark Scrolls. He stood at the altar with eyes like chipped obsidian, dark and unreadable, as incense curled around him like the breath of forgotten gods. His bride stood beside him, not a noblewoman from another land to forge alliances, not a servant lifted high by his whim, but his own sister. The crowd dared not flinch, for they believed, as he believed, that this was no union of flesh, but a fusion of divine essence, two parts of a god split at birth, now rejoined by holy matrimony. His name was Ptolemy II Philadelphus, and he was not the first to make such a vow, nor would he be the last. In the opulent decay of ancient Alexandria, gilded marble halls hid the rot of obsession. It wasn't merely power Ptolemy inherited from his father. It was a doctrine, a belief that their bloodline, flowing from Alexander the Great's divine legacy, was sacred. Mortal love had no place in this ritual. Arsinoe II, his full sister, stood as both reflection and rival. When their eyes met, the tension in the room was a tapestry of reverence and dread. The high priests called down the blessings of Isis and Osiris, the divine siblings who once ruled the heavens as lovers. Now brother and sister were man and wife. To the uninitiated, it reeked of incestuous madness. But within the architecture of ancient Egyptian theology, long before the Greeks arrived with scrolls and sandals, this union was an echo of cosmic order. The pharaoh, once seen as Horus on earth, was expected to mirror the gods. And what were gods if not family made whole through flesh? But even for Ptolemy and Arsinoe, it wasn't just faith. It was strategy. Arsinoe had already been queen twice before, once in Thrace, once in Egypt. She was cunning, politically astute, and knew how to manipulate not just men, but the mythos of monarchy itself. After her previous husband, Lysimachus, died, she orchestrated the downfall of her rival half-brother and fled back to Egypt. There she did not plead with Ptolemy. She ruled beside him. Some whispered she ruled instead of him. Their marriage was declared publicly with great fanfare. Temples were rededicated to Theoi Adelphoi, the sibling gods. Coins bore their likenesses side by side, as equals, as lovers, as rulers. No shame, only divinity. But the truth was darker. Behind the golden facades and marble reliefs were whispers of children never born, of jealous courtiers silenced, of a dynasty so obsessed with purity that it began to eat itself from within. This was not a singular madness. It was a pattern carved into stone and sewn into silk. For centuries before and after, the royals of Egypt continued the practice. Pharaoh Akhenaten and his mysterious wife-sister, possibly Nefertiti. Tutankhamun, product of a brother-sister union, who ruled briefly before being entombed with a clubbed foot and malformed spine. The gods were merciless in their irony. The people saw the splendor but not the sickness. They worshipped the pharaohs as divine intermediaries, but rarely asked what price such holiness required. Ptolemy II died admired and deified. Arsinoe followed soon after, her temples still fragrant with offerings. No child survived them. Their love was a cage lined in gold. Yet Egypt was not alone in this. Far across the ocean, beyond even the reach of Rome's shadow, in mountains kissed by the sun and wrapped in cloud, another empire rose. And in it, another god-king made his sister his bride, not for lust, but for empire. The Inca spoke of Inti, the sun god, whose radiant blood flowed through their royal line. Only those born of the sun could rule. And who else bore that light but one sister? The Sapa Inca was both emperor and deity. From childhood, he was groomed to lead and to worship his own divinity. When he came of age, the high priests did not search the valleys for a suitable match. They turned inward. The emperor's sister, the Koya, was often wed to him in solemn ceremony atop the sacred stones of Cusco. They faced the heavens, their breath mingling with the thin mountain air, as the people watched and wept with awe. This was not a private affair. It was the recalibration of the universe itself. But behind the solemn chants, behind the embroidered garments and gold masks, was a truth as brittle as bone. The union was political theater, engineered to prevent power from seeping into rival clans. Inca succession was never just about birth, it was about blood undiluted. Sibling marriage ensured that the divine thread was neither frayed nor challenged. The Koya, far from passive bride, often held real power, sometimes directing rituals, other times serving as regent. She was not merely his wife, she was the other half of the sun. Still, not all went as the gods desired. When Huayna Capac, one of the greatest Sapa Inca, married his sister and bore children, it seemed the system worked. But when smallpox arrived, carried on the breath of foreign invaders, his chosen heir died before the crown touched his head. What followed was a war between sons, Atahualpa and Huascar, half-brothers from different mothers. The bloodline, once guarded with such zeal, became a battlefield, and when the Spaniards arrived, they found not unity but ruins. The Incas, like the Ptolemies, believed their incest was holy, but their gods offered no protection from bullets or betrayal. Far older than either empire, across windswept deserts and fire-worshipping altars, another civilization practiced the same ritual under a different name, Swedoda. Among the ancient Zoroastrians of Persia, a theology was born that viewed marriage within the family not as sin, but as sacred. To marry a sister, a daughter, or even one's mother was seen, by some sects, as the highest expression of religious purity, to keep the holy fire untainted. Zoroastrianism was no fringe cult. It was the state religion of the Achaemenid Empire, the same lineage from which Cyrus the Great and Darius I descended. Though mainstream practice avoided incest, texts like the Pahlavi Bundahishan recorded divine encouragement for Swedoda. In their cosmogony, the primal couple were brother and sister. Their unity gave rise to the first humans. Royal chronicles are murkier. Some later reports, likely colored by Greek and Roman disgust, accuse Persian kings of marrying their daughters. Whether fully accurate or propagandist, the rumors clung. Alexander himself justified some of his conquest by denouncing the impurities of Persian custom, but those he accused would have looked upon his horror as ignorance. In their eyes, it was the outside world that was corrupted, not them. The tension here was not just genetic or ethical, it was metaphysical. The Zoroastrian struggle between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, the eternal war between good and evil, was mirrored in the soul of the empire. To purify the world, one must first purify the self. And what could be purer than keeping sacred blood within sacred bounds? Still, the practice faded, buried under centuries of conquest, conversion, and shame. But echoes remained, even in the Pacific, where volcanoes glowed like the eyes of jealous gods, royalty bound themselves by blood. In ancient Hawaii, the concept of mana, spiritual power, was central. It flowed through chiefs and kings like a current, passed down and intensified by proximity. And the closest one could be was within the womb. The Ali'i Nui, the high chiefs, often married their sisters or half-sisters to preserve mana. The most sacred of unions were called nahale, brother-sister marriages among nobility of equal rank. Children from these couplings were considered near divine, but there was no tenderness in the arrangement. Love was incidental, survival was paramount. To dilute one's mana with common blood was not just a mistake, it was an insult to the gods and ancestors. When Captain Cook arrived in 1778, he saw the grandeur but not the grim undercurrent. He did not live long enough to understand it. Across continents, across millennia, kings and queens bathed themselves in the illusion of divinity. They sacrificed love, health, and legacy to maintain a lie so powerful it became a religion, that gods do not marry strangers, they marry reflections. And so the first part ends, beneath the perfume of lilies and the scent of blood too familiar. The baby's body had no name, no crown, no breath, yet it was wrapped in silk and buried beside a golden effigy of a god. In the cold shadows of a Ptolemaic tomb, one could count not just kings and queens, but their children. Infants with clubbed limbs, twisted jaws, sunken ribs. Some never saw a sunrise, others lived long enough to become tragic echoes of what divine blood had promised. For the pharaohs, the cost of divinity was not just spiritual, it was biological. As generations of sibling marriage compounded, so too did the flaws written into their genes. Tutankhamun, the boy king hailed for his golden tomb, was himself the product of full sibling union. His spine was curved, his foot deformed, and his skull elongated. The royal propaganda painted him as the rebirth of Horus. The autopsy revealed otherwise. And still the tradition endured, not in ignorance but in defiance. For even illness was preferable to dilution. In their palaces the gods bled quietly. And yet, what is madness in one culture is divinity in another. As we move beyond the sands of Egypt and the peaks of the Andes, the silence deepens, the mist thickens. In ancient Persia, the echoes of Swidoda still whisper from fire temples lost to time. The Sassanid dynasty, descendants of Ardashir and torchbearers of Zoroastrian orthodoxy, wove Swidoda into state ideology. While much of Persian society married along clan lines, royalty, those who claimed descent from Yazata and divine fire, sometimes looked only inward. Among the noble priesthood, spiritual incest was not hidden, but praised. Texts like the Denkard and Bundahishan, theological blueprints of the faith, described the marriage of brother to sister as an act that pleased Ahura Mazda. But even within these dusty pages, one reads tension. Some sects, like the Zervanites, twisted time and fate, claiming even the creation of evil was divine necessity. In their cosmology, duality itself was born from a singular source, and what is closer to singularity than siblings made one? The Magi debated in whispers. What if sin was simply misinterpretation? What if salvation lay not in avoiding taboo, but embracing it? But outside Persia's fire-lit courts, the world recoiled. When Greek historians encountered Persian beliefs, they were horrified. Herodotus, Xenophon, even the later Plutarch. Each one described Persian incest not as faith, but as filth. They did not understand that to the Magi, purity was not in the flesh, but the fire within it. Still, the rituals were quieted with time. Alexander's conquest shattered the Zoroastrian hierarchy, scattering its scriptures and priests. And while the later Sassanids tried to resurrect its glory, Islamic conquest extinguished much of what remained. The practice of Swedoda, once whispered in sacred chambers, was now shouted down as heresy. But nothing dies in full. Even today, among fragments of ancient scriptures and oral lore, one can trace the cracked outline of a forgotten theology where sister and brother knelt before fire and called it holy. Thousands of miles away, across oceans and volcanoes, that same ideology would rise again, not as religion, but as essence. In the Hawaiian archipelago, islands carved by wrathful gods, the royal bloodlines were steeped in mana, the invisible energy that governed existence. Mana flowed through land, ocean, and people, but its concentration lay in the Alii Nui, the high chiefs and sacred monarchs. The purer the blood, the greater the mana. And the purest blood was that which never left the family. Among these islands, the most revered unions were not arranged between villages or tribes, but between siblings. Full sibling marriage was not only accepted, it was necessary. children of these unions were considered niaupio, divinely sacred. They were destined to rule not just as chiefs, but as living gods. But it was not love that brought them together. Kamehameha the Great, the founder of the Hawaiian kingdom, understood this balance. Though he did not marry a full sister, he carefully orchestrated marriages to cousins and half-relatives to protect his lineage. It was his successors, especially in the early kingdom, who revived the ancient tradition with startling fervor. When missionaries from America and Europe arrived, they were horrified to learn of these royal unions. They called them pagan, vile, incestuous. But to the Hawaiians it was simply natural law. Mana was not a metaphor, it was life. To dilute it with common blood was to weaken the land itself. Some queens and kings, like Keopulani, the mother of Kamehameha II and III, were born of such sibling unions. Her status was so high that even the highest chiefs had to kneel in her presence. She could not walk on common ground. Her footsteps were death to those without permission. That was the price and power of Niaupio blood. But as with all empires, the tide shifted. The arrival of Christianity and colonial influence did not merely challenge Hawaiian law, it dismantled its spiritual framework. The very concept of mana was dismissed as superstition. Royal sibling marriage, once a sacred rite, was outlawed. Within decades, the divine lines were either severed or married out into foreign families. The gods were silenced, and their bloodlines sold. And yet, beneath the ruins of temples and the lingering chants of kahuna priests, the memory lingers. The belief that certain blood was too sacred to share outside the family, too powerful to waste. What links Ptolemy to the Inca to the Zoroastrians, and them to the Hawaiian royals is not geography, nor even theology. It is obsession, an obsession with purity, with divinity, with the idea that rulership is not granted, it is inherited, and to protect it, no price is too high, even if that price is sanity. By the third generation, the Ptolemies were visibly unwell. King Ptolemy VIII, Urgates II, born of royal incest, was so cruel and unstable that he murdered his own son during a public ceremony. He once married his niece, then her mother, then switched back again. He fed enemies to crocodiles, exiled advisors by whim, and was called Fiskin, fatty, by his own people. The dynasty, obsessed with the divine, had collapsed into grotesque theater. And yet, in his mind, he was a god. Similarly, the Incas, once unified by divine rule, fell not to foreign weapons alone, but to the unraveling of a belief system that placed blood above all. Their sibling marriages had bred both emperors and rivals. When Atahualpa was captured by Pizarro, he did not beg. He offered gold, not because he feared death, but because he believed his blood was too sacred to spill. He died anyway, strangled, alone, under foreign stars. Zoroastrian Persia would never again rise with the same fire. Its rituals faded, its temples crumbled. But the idea remained, a whisper through time that some blood must remain untouched, even if it turned black with inbreeding. And in Hawaii, the last true Niaupio were buried with Christian crosses, their mana unrecognized by the god they had not chosen. Still, in each of these worlds, the union of brother and sister was not about lust. That would be too simple. It was about control. Control of legacy, of power, of reality itself. To marry a sister was to say, I am the beginning and the end. I am the seed and the soil. I need no outside world. I am the world. But the world, as it always does, changed. When bloodlines try to defy time, they rot. By the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra VII, last of her line, had become both legend and warning. Though she famously allied herself with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony, she too had married her brother, twice. Ptolemy the 13th and Ptolemy the 14th. Both died mysteriously. Her children survived only through foreign fathers. She was the final fruit of a tree twisted in on itself. Rome watched her die and called it tragic. But perhaps, in her final breath, Cleopatra saw what her ancestors could not. That divinity hoarded becomes madness. That purity, left to rot in golden rooms, will poison the very empire it was meant to preserve. And so the story of sibling marriage is not one of perversion, but of desperation. Desperation to become gods. Desperation to preserve what time cannot. Desperation to rewrite the rules of nature. But nature always reclaims its throne, even when that throne is gilded with gold and guarded by blood. The tombs were silent now, stones cracked with time, names worn smooth by centuries of wind and conquest. But beneath those stones, beneath the dust and silence, the bloodlines still spoke. They whispered of children who never learned to walk, of sisters who became queens, of kings who stood before mirrors and saw gods staring back. These were not whispers of guilt, but of conviction. For them, sibling marriage was not a corruption of nature. It was its perfection. But what kind of mind must be shaped to accept such fate? To look upon one's sister and see a bride, to offer one's daughter to the altar of purity and call it destiny. It begins early. In Egypt, the young prince is not raised with other children. He is taught not to laugh, not to bleed, not to doubt. His sister, his match in blood, is never just a sibling. From the moment she can walk, she is cloaked in silk, trained in hymns, hidden from the gaze of commoners. Together they learn the myths of Isis and Osiris, divine siblings who brought order to chaos through sacred union. No bedtime tales of romance, only duty. The priestess points to the stars and says, "There, the gods who were brother and sister, the gods you will become." What choice does the child have but to follow the path carved in stone? By adolescence, the brother and sister are two halves of the same lie. The court celebrates them, the priests anoint them. The statues are carved in their image. When the marriage comes, it is not seen as defiance but coronation. And any revulsion, the animal recoil that whispers this is wrong, is buried beneath layers of incense and prayer. But inside cracks form. Some pharaohs, like Akhenaten, turned inward with terrifying fervor. He and his probable sister-wife, Nefertiti, ruled not just Egypt, but its gods. He banished the old pantheon, declared Aten, the solar disk, as the only god, and built a city in its name. His reign was obsessed with light, with blood, with purity. Art changed. Faces grew elongated, limbs unnatural. Statues of Akhenaten and Nefertiti depicted them as grotesque ideals, neither man nor woman, neither mortal nor divine. They had become the myth. Their children, born from such myth-making, were sickly. Some scholars believe 6 daughters died young, the cost of gods playing house. And still, they persisted. In the Andes, the Inca child is told he is the son of the sun itself. His sister, born of the same divine flame, is his destined queen. From the moment he can walk, he is taught to stand tall while others bow. His word is law. His thoughts are prophecy. His marriage, already chosen, etched in ritual before his first breath. But what happens when gods fall in love elsewhere? Not all Sepa Inca desired their sisters. Some looked beyond the narrow confines of blood, at priestesses or concubines or warriors. But such deviation was dangerous. One such man, Topa Inca Yupanqui, was said to have taken a foreign bride from the Chimu, breaking tradition. The court panicked. Could a child born of foreign womb carry divine manna? The priests debated, the nobles murmured, and soon a quiet solution presented itself. The Chimu queen disappeared. No record, no remains, only silence. The sacred blood must flow pure, no matter the cost. Psychologically, such systems breed more than just loyalty. They breed paranoia. To trust no one outside the bloodline is to trust only those who share your reflection. But what happens when that reflection hungers for your crown? The Ptolemies knew this too well. Ptolemy XIII, husband and brother to Cleopatra, drowned in the Nile during their civil war. His younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, also her husband, also died mysteriously. Cleopatra was both sister and executioner. Love had no place in this game, only legacy. When power lives within the family, so does betrayal. The same pattern emerged in Persia. Though not all Zoroastrian royalty practiced Swedoda, those who did found themselves isolated. Foreign diplomats mocked them. Internal dissent grew. Daughters feared fathers, sons feared uncles. And when Islam swept across the land, the surviving priests, those who once praised incest as sacred, fled into silence. Their books were burned, their temples buried. They became ghosts in their own land. And still, the stories survived. In Hawaii, the Neopio unions continued into the early kingdom. But with each passing generation, the imported morality of missionaries clashed with the island's ancient laws. One queen, Kamamalu, married her half-brother Liholiho, Kamehameha II. She walked the tightrope between sacred duty and foreign disgust. The Westerners who visited her court described her with fascination and pity. She wore British dresses over tattooed skin, smiled with teeth filed in ritual, and spoke two truths, one in Hawaiian to her people, another in English to her colonizers. But the disease came anyway. In 1824, Kamamalu and her husband-brother traveled to London. Within weeks, both contracted measles. Immunity did not protect sacred blood. Kamamalu died in agony, her body quarantined in a foreign palace. Her husband died days later. The British mourned politely, but privately recoiled. To them, they had buried two savages in royal clothing. To the Hawaiians, they had lost gods. So what survives of these rituals now? The world that once worshipped sibling marriage has either forgotten it or condemned it. Modern ethics reject it outright. Science warns of genetic decay. Religion brands it sin. And yet, somewhere buried in the DNA of royal families, in the brittle pages of forbidden texts, in the cracked stone of forgotten temples, lies the memory, not of lust, but of desperation. Desperation to keep power immortal, to cheat time, to own not just the land but the sky, to become gods through ritual repetition. But when mortals play gods, they forget what gods fear most. Isolation. To be divine in these systems was to be alone. The pharaoh, locked in palaces none could enter. The Inca, high in temples none could ascend. The Persian high priest, cloaked in fire and secrets. The Hawaiian queen, adored and cursed in equal measure. None could marry for love. None could speak freely. Their blood was sacred, but their souls were prisoners. And what of the children born from these unions? They bore the burden. They were worshipped, yes, but also feared. When they faltered, the court whispered of punishment from the gods. When they cried, it was seen as weakness. When they rebelled, if they lived long enough, they were erased from history. History remembers the marriages, the coronations, the rituals, but it forgets the silence of a brother forced to lie with his sister, the silence of a queen who buries another stillborn child, the silence of a priest who wonders, just for a moment, if the gods are laughing, and yet the line continued, until it didn't. By the time of Cleopatra's death, the Ptolemaic dynasty was exhausted, inbred, feared, hated. Her children, fathered by Romans, could not claim the Egyptian throne without Roman approval. The dynasty had devoured itself. In the Andes, the Spanish decapitated the Inca leadership, literally. Their temples burned, their language banned, their gods mocked. The sacred line, so carefully protected by sibling marriage, was reduced to rumor and ruin. Zoroastrianism splintered. Some texts survived in India in the hands of the Parsi diaspora, but Zwedoda vanished, not debated, not defended, simply erased. And Hawaii, the last monarch, Queen Liliuokalani, never married a brother. By her time, the ancient traditions were forbidden. Her throne was stolen, her palace a museum, her gods extinct. What remains is not the ritual, but the warning. That power hoarded becomes poison. That blood worshipped turns rancid. That divinity claimed through incest leaves no heirs, only tombs. And yet, as the wind howls through ruins, as gold-plated sarcophagi rest beneath sand and silence, we are left with a single question, uncomfortable, eerie, and eternal. Did they believe it? Did they believe they were gods? Or were they simply children, born into cages of marble and flame, told to call their sisters wives, their duty destiny, and their loneliness divine? We may never know, but we hear their whispers, and we listen, because somewhere in that echo is a reflection of every human empire that ever claimed itself chosen. She stood alone on the palace steps, dressed in white, eyes cast to the sea where her gods had once arrived. The sky above Hawaii was unusually gray that morning, as if it too sensed the final gasp of something sacred. Queen Liliuokalani had been deposed. The palace guards now wore foreign uniforms. Missionaries knelt where Kahuna once prayed. The divine line, once preserved through generations of sacred unions, was broken, not by time or decay, but by pen and gun. She looked back at her home, Iolani Palace, its windows shuttered like eyes refusing to cry. There would be no more royal sibling weddings, no more children born of Mana. And yet she carried their memory, not as a monarch, but as a mourner. For what died in Hawaii was not just a kingdom, but a world view, a belief that divine right was inherited through blood alone, and that the purest blood flowed within the same womb it was born beside. Across the world, other ghosts stirred. In Alexandria, beneath layers of modern stone and noise, the tombs of the Ptolemies remain lost. No one knows where Cleopatra lies, no monument, no confirmed grave. The last of the sibling gods vanished into the sand, as if Egypt itself was ashamed. And perhaps it was, because in the end, the dynasty that had twisted brotherly love into divine right left no legacy but ruin. And yet, even as historians reject them, as the world shudders at the idea of royal incest, the myths endure. In movies, Cleopatra is still crowned beside her brother husband. In textbooks, Tutankhamun's malformed bones are examined like puzzles. In museums, gold masks stare blankly with the features of kings born from the same bloodlines. We try to forget, but we display their portraits. We reenact their tragedies. We dress as gods and perform their rituals under different names. The question isn't why they married their siblings, it's why we still remember them. Because in their madness we see a reflection of our own obsessions, purity, power, legacy. We inherit their hunger even as we condemn their methods. We tell ourselves we're more civilized now, that love is free, power is earned, and blood is just biology. But in the shadows, our dynasties persist, wealth passed through bloodlines, nepotism justified by pedigree, nations ruled by name instead of merit. Their palaces have crumbled, but the idea survives. In ancient Persia, the fire temples are silent. No more chants for Swedoda, no priests preaching union with one's kin. And yet even in modern regimes, loyalty to blood is prized above all. Power hoards itself within families. Corruption wears a crown and calls it tradition. In the Andes, Machu Picchu stands as a ghost city, too high to conquer, too sacred to ignore. The Sapa Inca are long dead, but the trauma of colonization remains, a scar etched across generations who were taught that their gods were false and their marriages criminal. But what if we misunderstood? What if, in their desperation to keep the world from falling apart, they believed the only safe place was within the family? What if marrying their sister wasn't about dominance, but about fear? Fear of dilution, fear of betrayal, fear of gods abandoning them if even a drop of blood went astray. In trying to become divine, they made themselves inhuman. What began as worship ended as warning, and it is a warning that history repeats over and over again, like a whisper passed down through haunted corridors. If you build a kingdom on blood, you will drown in it. The gods they emulated, Osiris and Isis, Inti and Mama Killa, Ahura Mazda's primordial pair, were never meant to be imitated so literally. They were stories, symbols, reflections of inner longing. But to mortals drunk on their own divinity, myth becomes mandate. Ritual becomes cage, so they wedded their sisters. Not out of love, but out of commandment. Not to create, but to preserve. And it is this, more than the act itself, that chills us across time. The erasure of choice. The child born knowing his bride would be his sister. The daughter trained not to dream of freedom, but to fold into her brother's shadow. The mother forced to bless what her instincts screamed against. Even the gods, had they watched, might have turned away. But still the cycle continued until its end, and every end was the same. For every Ptolemy, a tomb swallowed by sand. For every Inca, a pyre lit by Spanish hands. For every Zoroastrian priest, a silence left in fire's place. For every Niaupio child, a bloodline unrecognized by the world that replaced them. And so we stand now, looking back, not with scorn, but with a terrible understanding. They were not monsters. They were mirrors. What they did, we remember, not because we admire them, but because they expose the depths to which humans will descend to protect power. Their palaces may be ruins, but their choices haunt us still. And maybe, in some corner of forgotten land, in a tomb yet undiscovered, a brother still lies beside his sister, both crowned in gold, both swallowed by history, both waiting for a world that no longer believes in gods made of blood. But the bones remember, the stones remember, and now, so do we. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.